Hello and welcome everybody. I'm Anthony Gonzalez and I am the Senior Program Coordinator with the Higher Education Center for Alcohol and Drug Misuse Prevention and Recovery. And I want to welcome you all today to our webinar titled The Charge for Change, an Opportunity to Enhance Campus Hazing and Alcohol Misuse Prevention. Joining us today is Dr. Stevan Veldkamp and Dr. Patrick Biddix. Before we get started with today's content, I do just have a couple of housekeeping slides I'd like to share with everybody. Here on the screen should look somewhat familiar as we are in the Zoom webinar format. We do welcome your questions at any time throughout the live session for our panelists, but we do kindly ask that you utilize the Q&A feature. We do have the chat enabled, so feel free to introduce yourself as well as share resources and reflections as it relates to today's content. But again, if you have any specific questions for our presenters, we do kindly ask that you utilize the Q&A feature. It is just a bit easier for us to keep track of the questions as they come in. Additionally, we do have captioning enabled for today's session, and you should be able to set that up through your bottom dashboard. If you have any audio issues that you're unable to resolve, feel free to reach out to us in the chat and we will try our best to walk you through that process. Additionally, we encourage everybody to learn more about becoming a member of the Higher Education Center. You can learn more about the different membership tiers and the benefits that go along with them by visiting our website at hecaod.osu.edu. Additionally, today's session has been approved for one entry-level CHES contact hour. To receive the CHES credit, you must purchase the CHES add-on. You must attend the entire live session and complete the evaluation within 2 business days. The evaluation should open up in your browser as you leave today's webinar, but if you have any issues accessing the evaluation, please feel free to reach out to us. Certificates will be sent out to attendees that meet the requirements within 30 days of the live event. We also have quite a few upcoming events that I'd like to share with everybody. Our next water cooler chat will be taking place on June 9th, and we'll be focusing on environmental scanning for impaired road use. We also have our RISH, or Recovery is Spoken Here, Train the Trainer Recovery Ally training taking place later this month on June 17th. Our next free webinar will be taking place July 9th, and we'll be focusing on new products, same nicotine, understanding e-cigarettes, and oral nicotine pouch use among college students. And then we have a grant writing crash course, budgets, timelines, and SMART goals scheduled for July 16th. Additionally, we did just launch our registration for our biennial review learning collaborative today. So be sure to visit our website to be able to look at the full agenda for the day. And with that, it is my great pleasure to turn it over to our presenters today. Joining us today is Dr. Veldkamp, Executive Director of the Timothy Piazza Center for Fraternity and Sorority Research, and Dr. Biddix, Associate Vice Provost and Executive Director of Quality Enhancement Plan, and Jimmy and Eileen Check, Endowed Professor of Higher Education with the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Thank you both for being here with us, and it's my pleasure turning it over to you at this time.
All right. Thank you, Anthony. I'm going to share some of our slide decks now, and let's get to those. All right. Folks, we are able to be here today as the Piazza Center is endowed. So we're here in perpetuity, I like to say. So these are our folks that are our signature sponsors that enable us to do this work and be in front of you. And I'll hand it over and have Patrick introduce himself, and then we'll get in depth into the charge for change. So, Patrick.
Thanks, Steve. I'm very happy to be here and be able to join you all today. As we started working on the document, let me first say that the Charge for Change really is a huge collaborative effort on behalf of a lot of folks who worked on this thing. And it's derived from well, I'm not going to bury the lead too much. It's derived from some of the work in NIAAA and College AIM that you'll recognize. I think those of you who work in the alcohol space. As we started working on this, we kept asking ourselves a pretty basic question: why are we still having the same conversations about hazing after all these years? The Charge for Change was our attempt to pull together what we learned from research and practice and make it more usable. The central idea is that hazing is persistent but not inevitable, influenced by culture, environments, and systems, which means in our belief we can do something about it. The inspiration for change, as I said, I didn't want to bury the lead too much, really came from alcohol prevention. If you've worked in that space, you've seen the NIAAA framework and how it helped campuses really distinguish between strategies with stronger evidence, promising approaches, and those with little evidence behind them in that tiered structure you can see on the screen below. That really got us asking a similar question about hazing. What can we learn from decades of prevention science instead of starting from scratch? Also, as you know, may know, hazing is, we call it commingled with alcohol as well and some other public health concerns. So a lot of what you see in the document really reflects that idea. We don't have to reinvent prevention science. We can build on what we've already learned. Some of the inspiration for that, it was College Aim's emphasis on environmental strategies. For a long time in addressing alcohol misuse, prevention focused heavily on educational initiatives, and mostly on educating individuals through prevention efforts. But we learned that education really wasn't enough. So like policies, things like policies, norms, accountability systems, leadership expectations, and the broader environment all also influenced behavior. And the same implied lessons applied to hazing. If we're only focused on changing individual students, we're missing many of the conditions that help sustain behavior. So one of the themes, I wrote this one down because I wanted to say it exactly right as I was thinking through the notes for today. One of the themes you'll see throughout this document is that prevention becomes more effective when we think beyond the individual and start paying attention to the environment surrounding them. So think about that. Like we're really focused on in our work, yes, the individual and changing behavior, that's absolutely important, but we're working at a systems level on environment as well. So why this matters. This is really where all of those ideas start to come together. Most campuses have policies, most have trainings, most have reporting systems and conduct processes. And those of you who work with student organizations and groups know that they may even have their own policies and definitions. And as we work across state lines, different states have different have policies and definitions. So the Stop Campus Hazing Act really helped us coalesce in kind of one effort in thinking about this from a national perspective, integrating this into the campus and a more contextual, like local contextual environment. What we found, though, is the challenge really isn't a lack of effort or concern. We found in the literature that efforts are mostly fragmented, reactive, or focused more on awareness than behavioral change. So it's understanding what hazing is, less about changing the behavior itself. And one of the phrases we kept coming back to is this idea of moving from checking boxes to changing conditions. Because if the conditions that support hazing stay the same, we shouldn't be surprised when the behavior stays the same. So throughout the document, if you get a chance to review the Charge for Change, you'll see we're really asking a different question. What are the conditions that help prevention succeed, and how do we build on those intentionally? So a couple different, oh, go ahead, Steve, you're up.
Oh, I was going to say, in our transition here, in terms of the utility of the document, as Patrick has outlined what this document is, we really hope that campus and the folks that you work with side to side, above you, potentially below you, and so are able to utilize this document to align and to get folks on the same page. I've referred to this as the Campus Hazing Prevention Committee, that meets. Hopefully your campus has one or a version of that. Maybe it's for all the prevention initiatives, which would be fantastic. But to get folks on the same page, and it's 10 committee meetings in one, is the way I framed it. I don't know if that's actually factual, but it feels like that in terms of being able to get folks on the same page. To advocate for effective resources, and again, maybe that's the managing up piece. We have some exciting supplemental work and development, a guide for presidents and trustees and things like that we'll be starting to produce as well. And so this is a working document. This is not a static document, and it's definitely a working conversation as we enable and help campuses start to implement some of the key facts and roadmaps and matrices within the document itself. So advocating for resources, designing that roadmap, and getting those folks aligned with what is going to be the next step for a campus and building out their effective programs. Incremental change, that's great. Multi-level, multi-strategy initiatives along the sociological model here. So, and again, guiding and supporting those decisions as campuses are into those phases of activity. Again, this is all scaffolded by the bill that passed in December of 2024, and so all the hard work that had gone into that over 10 plus years, especially Dr. Elizabeth Allen and Stop Hazing and their monumental effort with families to pass that federal legislation, and the opportunity that proposes in the updating of Clery, reporting definitions, and that compliance part of it. But there's also a part of it that demands that campuses now have a plan for their hazing prevention program, and it should be research informed. So that's really the call to action that we, I would say, stepped up to with some great advice from Dr. Jason Kilmer and Dr. Max Crowley at the Prevention Research Center at Penn State on being able to help define that for policymakers, for campuses, for insurance companies, for the leadership in the prevention space on your campuses, as well as the practitioners that are in the work and doing the work. So it's a multi-level document and multi-use document. Um, the one of the pullouts, and I love that Dr. Biddix pulled all these amazing quotes from a lot of different resources throughout the document. But this one, compliance is not commitment. If people are still doing the behavioral, we are still doing the behavior, we're not doing the work. Dr. Lori Hart in University Risk Management and Insurance Association podcast. Dr. Lori Hart works for Holmes Murphy Fraternity Practice Insurance Company. Has done and is a major speaker in prevention spaces across campuses and across our country. And so I love that, and I think it really distills this what this is really about, because we have a lot of compliance efforts which are important, and they're not to be skipped over by any stretch of the imagination. But we have an amazing opportunity as prevention science has matured to be able to come back at this perennial issue. I mean, we can't get away from this because it's a part of the human condition. And so, how are we going to address that together? And leading past that, and so some of the major principles in the document that we're going to be reviewing our visible leadership and how that looks, the clear expectations with our staff, our campus leadership, and practitioners, as well as our students. The building sustainable efforts here, and that, again, an opportunity as prevention science has matured, that we can really dig into sustainable models, resource this, and I like to say it this way. Can we imagine prevention resource like never before? And really leaning into all the work that was done with the call to action for hazardous drinking prevention, in addition to hazing prevention, in addition to sexual violence prevention, and all boats rise to a rising prevention tide. So with that, and lastly, how campuses align some of their systems and their structures to really bring about that positive change. So again, a very high level conversation and another punchline for us in this as we set up the conversation, as we are going to move into the strategies here pretty soon. And as looking at what is effective and those coordinated strategies that are operating again across the good old individual, organizational, and community levels, and how that is a must. Like we have to operate in those three spaces. Does a campus and have they carved out enough resources to be able to do that? And align those folks. So again, those alignments, I would say another conversation we have a lot with campuses is give yourself grace. You are doing a lot of the work. Are you doing it in a coordinated fashion versus a fragmented fashion? I actually skipped over something in our agenda, which is Patrick is actually going to share a deeper dive into what the research has to say about in a summative fashion. So this is a quick review of over 6 years of culling through the literature and as well as our own study in this space to bring you what he's going to share with you here in just a couple seconds.
Yeah, if you want the 6-year version, I'm happy to do that. It's probably a little outside the scope of what we're doing today. My students don't appreciate that side of it, but that's where we are. One of the biggest takeaways is that hazing doesn't happen in isolation. That's one. The other one is really how early we start to see it manifest. I tell a story. I'll tell in brief here that I'm a part of Scouts BSA and work with my son in an organization. And one of his very first weekends in a new troop, we witnessed the beginning of what would have been a hazing type behavior that really was at a relatively low level when you think about the spectrum of hazing behaviors, but it's a conditioning behavior. It's still the boys are going through this thing. The adults are standing there condoning it by not stopping it, and it's training them at a very young age. My son was in sixth grade, would have. I mean, I stopped it. Was training them at a very young age that this is acceptable, and that's where it begins and where it begins to escalate. So, that's my quick aside without giving too much details about the full story. Um, the other pieces you hear us say, have heard us say very often, it's influenced by a combination of individual, group, organizational, cultural factors. So kind of a whole lot of it that goes into it. It's also really not experienced uniformly. So I'd love to be able to say that hazing is this, or hazing, happens in this way and that, and it's only present in this way in fraternities or that way on the softball team or whatever it is. But it really it can vary pretty dramatically, and so the cut across version of what the research shows there is that uh, sort of where it comes from, which is that students are looking for things we want them to find in college. It comes from seeking belonging, connection, identity, purpose, achievement, and it grows in that environment. It's just that the challenge becomes that those needs become connected with harmful traditions and expectations. So effective prevention, we learned in this larger view of literature, really isn't just about stopping behavior. It's about understanding what makes the behavior meaningful to the people participating in it and kind of where it originates and how it comes to us. So a couple of the conditions, I alluded to this a little bit in the previous slide, but it's important to note that some environments certainly create more risk than others. And that's one of the reasons we're very happy to be able to talk to you all today in this space of drug and alcohol misuse specifically tends to be commingled, right? So there's a couple of other places that it happens as well. Groups that place a high value on identity or status or loyalty or belonging really create these strong pressures to conform. We write it as high salience, high stakes, high risk, high stakes. There's a couple different ways to say it. Steve uses some phrasing that I really like there too. That actually might be his phrasing, but that really just kind of resonates with how, where we see it really take root and sustain. The research also points to things like unclear expectations, ambiguity, rule misalignment, and other factors that can intensify risk. Related to alcohol, I'll mention there too is that alcohol doesn't cause hazing, but it lowers judgment and increased risk taking, which makes intervention less likely or intervention efforts within a group environment. And the other piece of that is this sleep loss, right? That creates this just the combination of those things and then the belonging to the other pieces we mentioned before really creates this a petri dish that we we don't want to find where hazing conditions really occur. I alluded to before in my example of scouts that we talk about hazing as existing in a spectrum of behavior. Um, when most people hear the word, they tend to think about the most extreme incidents, right? You think about, what's one of the quotes that one of the parents mentioned on a podcast at one point, swallowing goldfish or something like that. I mean, of course, much more extreme than that, but these just outlandish examples of, oh yeah, somebody did this and it was funny and somebody did that. And those are the ones that tend to make the news. Um, but the things that research show that hazing really exists on a spectrum, and most students encounter lower level behaviors first that get dismissed as part of the tradition or team building or paying your dues or just part of the process. The challenge is that those behaviors start to normalize compliance, secrecy, and discomfort before someone recognizes them as hazing. And again, to go back to my initial example, that's what really bothered me so much about the activity that was going on a few years ago is it just that was socializing into normalizing and socializing hazing and compliance before it escalated. And it's one of the reasons students experience behaviors that meet the definition of hazing but don't label it that way. Steve earlier mentioned the landmark study we often talk about, which is the Allen and Madden 2008 study. And while it gave us a lot, but one of the big takeaways from that was that students could tell you that they'd been through a hazing type incident, but didn't label it that way. So by strict definition or even loose definition, they had participated in their membership opportunities through all these hazing experiences, but they couldn't label it that way because they didn't have the language for it yet. This is important from a prevention standpoint because if we focus on just if we think about just the most severe cases, we're intervening way too late in the process.
Mhm.
So what does this look like across this continuum? Framing hazing as a continuum, which is what we think about, changes the way we think about prevention. If we only focus on those most severe things, we're intervening reactively or a little too late down the line, right? Research suggests that many of the beliefs and norms and behaviors with hazing develop much earlier. We found some research that showed us as early as middle school, 25% of students, 1 in 4, had experienced some form of hazing in middle school. Um, so that's why prevention really isn't about responding just to harm. It's about recognizing and interrupting the smaller behaviors, the rationalization, the group norms. The one that I talk about often is the compliance that having a coach or an adult present or no or students knowing an adult is in the room or knows about the behavior makes it okay, right? Similar to what we've learned in alcohol prevention and other public health areas, we don't want to wait till the worst outcome occurs before we start to pay attention. The earlier we can identify and address patterns, the more opportunities we have to prevent harm before it escalates.
Mhm. So again, Patrick has mentioned the alcohol factor and the commingling and how I would say so many, especially of the hazardous, the aggravated hazing now a new term for the Tim's Law in the state of Pennsylvania that described and defined what aggravated hazing is, which is that forced alcohol consumption and those that lead to severe harm to students from students. And so thinking about the role of alcohol, and again, this is a jumping to hazardous drinking prevention science and when decision making is impaired and how often decision is that involve alcohol. So that impairment and that process of narrowing attention and what's salient and internal and external cues and what students are picking up that are the impelling cues and the inhibiting cues. Again, this is Dr. Jason Kilmer's addition to our reflection here that I'm parroting in this moment. But thinking about those impelling cues, that's funny. This is how we all are bringing us closer together in a bonding type of experience. Versus what it's saying about it's the humiliation factor that is actually occurring and then this is person does not seem into this at all. And where that psychological factor, that humiliation factor starts to enter into. And again, if this is a normalized behavior in one setting, how in the next setting or the next weekend, this can turn into an amped up version of this. And again, so when things get swept under the rug, so to speak, how this metastasizes in terms of further on down the road behaviors. So, oh, you're muted, Patrick.
Thanks. I was coughing, so I didn't want you to have to experience
Oh,
that. Um,
fine.
at this point in the document, we shift from an understanding the problem to understanding a little bit more about why it persists. So one of the things that stood out to us across the literature and the research is that barriers are often less about individual students and again more about environments. And you hear me keep repeating that, but I really want to address it as that's kind of the way our center works with the problem itself is really attacking the environment itself and understanding prevention as a system within that environment. So some of the problematic things we see are inconsistent definitions, normalization of behavior, underreported, fragmented ownership. What that means is things like uh, different groups taking ownership of hazing prevention on their own, but not necessarily a coordinated effort in and of itself. And then just challenges coordinating across campus. We have a hazing prevention team here on campus, and a couple of years ago they asked me to come visit when they were first forming, and we did an activity with them where we had them put up their all of their different efforts, and it was campus police and campus recreation and athletics. And I had said to them, if you could list on a board on this month by month, what is your hazing prevention effort? And they all listed everything they did in We looked at the board and the walls, and everything was in August and everything was in January. There was nothing anywhere else across the year. And when we asked about the content of their hazing prevention education efforts, it was all very similar. It's knowledge based, just a lot of duplicated efforts. And so that became a common thread in what we were seeing in some of the need for a full systems, like a systems look and a systems approach. So when we looked at this section on really trying to understand what the barriers and solutions were, a common thread that we saw was alignment and assessment. We need a shared understanding of the problem, but we also need data to understand what's happening, where the efforts are working, and where the gaps remain. And um, if anybody who's been in class with me knows I talk about the importance of assessment and data and its use and reciprocity and all sorts of those pieces all the time. And really, it's one of the things I appreciate most about the work we get to do with campuses is that that's what they've committed to, right? They're committing to diagnosing the problem, highlighting what one of their signature initiatives is that's really important, um, committing to the work of making that thing better. And once we learn that that thing's better, we can then translate it to other campuses as well. Because the issue becomes when the behavior persists year after year, it's often assigned conditions supporting the behavior persisting as well. So that the implementation of data or the use of data in there and understanding more precisely what the problem is and how the solutions work really helps us identify the conditions and determine whether we're actually creating a change.
Mhm. Right.
So at this point in the document, we're sort of at the end. We're giving you the flyby version of it, right? We're moving from understanding the problem to actually organizing prevention efforts. Steve earlier said, I wrote this down because I didn't want to forget it. Steve called it a working document. and this is the great example of it. Just through some feedback that we'd have from folks and some of the conversations like we're having with you all today and in the Q&A, we recognized that we were missing a column. We call this our bingo card. It just is a joke. So it's sort of the if you're on campus and you want to know, we ask folks, where do you target your hazing prevention efforts? This is maybe where you put your bingo chip. We were missing knowledge and awareness in the initial version of this and recognized that it was important to have that from a variety of reasons. Um, this framework lets you begin to see, and you can go ahead and highlight it all on there, Steve, if you don't mind. Yeah. And lets you see what we've been talking about before, the individual, organizational, community, this bigger approach, and how we move in our variety of different efforts that we have on campus and that we see, we move those from different levels of understanding to recovery, accountability, prevention, and protection. So this framework is presented not as something to memorize, but really as a way to help identify gaps. Where are we investing heavily? Where are we missing opportunities? Are our efforts reinforcing one another? The end of this system is not the entire thing filled out. It's connecting the dots between the pieces that you've put together to ensure that you have a coordinated campus system that really folks have somebody's taken charge of or several people have. It helps to move the document really in this system works best when pieces are connected and reinforcing one another. And this helps campuses think across multiple levels, students, organizations, and the broader environment, while also kind of considering where they are in the process as well.
Mhm. And if I could add, Patrick, and again, a little bit of the contrary or the negative view on that is that I've talked to so many campus professionals where potentially something that's happening in the recovery and accountability space is kind of contrary to what they're doing in the early identification and response space. And so they feel like colleagues are, they have the same goal, right? They want to curb, reduce, and change the severity of alcohol misuse, reduce the violence, reduce the associated behaviors. But the staff feel actively that what one unit is doing or department is doing is kind of in contrast to what they're doing or upends their good work. And so I think it's really a critical conversation that senior leadership be involved in this conversation. And so, depending on where you're at in your organizations, and if you're again on the ground and middle management in a leadership position, those are all extremely important roles. But one use, I think, of this mapping of the levels of individual organization community, but these four across the top here, I think are really essential for campuses to start to think about how do the owners of these different spaces coordinate their efforts. And creating that larger environmental opportunity that Patrick keeps reinforcing throughout this presentation, right? So this is a really important framework. We're really excited. I think it's one of the key features of the Charge for Change. And like Patrick said, it's a working document. So you actually go to the charge. This isn't updated yet. So you're seeing an updated version the first time. So thank you for the folks leaning into here. You've got brand new look at what will be part of the main document once we get that updated. All right, moving into and delving a little deeper into the individual strategies. Again, we framed the NIAAA report as our spirit animal in a joking kind of way with Jason Kilmer and friends. Bob Saltz, for those of you who are really into the hazardous drinking prevention literature, was one of our main editors on the document. Just to do a little name dropping there, but I'm blessed to have some incredible thinkers and prevention scientists involved in this project. All right, so individual strategies, research informed. We've already touched on this in the previous document, gave you that example, that important bystander skill development that students need to be able to say no, to be able to reroute behaviors of their peers, to put a stop to their peers, what all that is, and to interrupt those behaviors. Emerging research, and so it's great and it has some opportunities, but again, cautious in hanging our hat fully on these things. But the reflection modules and the videos, and I've had an opportunity to see a number of these wonderful videos. As an example, the Lonely Dog film, that really centers more mental health issues related to hazing, and that important story. Again, the Adam Oakes version, the Nolan Birch version. I mean, there's so many, I think, great videos that are out there now with complementary educational opportunities to really help students process those things. So that's emerging. Ideas from practice. And practice are those embedded, those impactful speakers, especially if they can really make a connection to the issue that the campus is having in that audience. Cannot stress that part enough, because how many students may attend those that's not their story, that's not what hazing presents as. I often share that, I say it stacks differently or it looks so dramatically different in one subpopulation that it's all about violence, and another one it's hazardous drinking, and another one it's relational aggression. So we need to be really, and again, that points back to data, right? We need to be looking at data, looking at our subpopulations, and where are all the hazardous drinking concerns at? And are they here, and here on our campus? And then again, change the topic and where is it other things that we need to refocus and re-engage, and potentially have a different speaker for that part of the community that is really dealing with a racial aggression, that deals to mental health issues, increasing suicide rates, all those types of things, versus over here where it's absolutely hazardous drinking prevention. And we really need to lean into what NIAAA has to say, as well as the Charge for Change in that work. All right, individual organizational, I'll skip through this a little quicker. We already mentioned the research-informed practices. And again, those coaches, those advisors, how important that is. Switching to looking at the redesign and or the helping the organizations that have some type of onboarding experience and how staff works with them. Especially from your leadership development area, or your student development, student activities areas, and those partnership opportunities to say, hey, let's work with these organizations that potentially have more concerns with their alcohol misuse, and really talk about that onboarding experience and what is that like, and can we work with them on more pro-social, less and reducing those risks that might be associated, and we can steer them away from some of the bad practices. I love to cite University of Texas at Austin and their 9 dimensions of organizational health and how they built that out. It's phenomenal resources. So Marilyn Russell and her team have built out amazing resources there. Ideas from practice, positive attrition, again, those alternatives and building cohesion without coercion, highly important, especially for groups that have committed to some higher values, potentially the values of your host institution. And how are they exercising? How are they committing to them? How are they how are they building education around them that is meaningful, that's a meaningful rite of passage, that is difficult, that is a challenge, and that takes some really thought into in terms of developing a curriculum, so to speak, just like you would for a classroom. That it is a significant experience that students feel that they've had a meaningful rite of passage as a result. All right. Last but not least, community strategies and consistent enforcement and how difficult, well, that challenge and getting folks from all different units and departments on campus, the police, the student activities, the leadership, the fraternity sorority life office, the ROTC, all those types of things, and getting them in concert. And then building out those opportunities for intervention and accountability, and what that looks like, and how we need to do that with fidelity. And so that's a huge one in terms of the research informed, is those aligning of policies paired with those consistent enforcement opportunities. A lot of work to do that, year in and year out. All right. Emerging amnesty policies and awareness, utilization of them. And this is not just about medical amnesty. Well, some campuses it's about medical amnesty. Others is about amnesty from policies of reporting. Others are adapting this to organizational amnesty. And I give an example of Northwestern University. Go to their webpage. You can see about how organizational amnesty is being utilized, and great feedback. And I would say some really positive results at Northwestern University regarding that. Ideas from practice are parental notifications, multi-campus consortia that reinforce campuses learning and growing together, and then cross-institutional accountability, and who's in charge of that. I definitely have a kind of stump speech for our compliance folks. And if we can reframe compliance into, are we just doing it, or is it the integrity and effectiveness of programs? And so it's a both and. Yes, we're accounting that we do it, but we're doing it through questions that get to the assessment of effectiveness of our prevention programming, our hazing prevention, violence, hazardous drinking prevention. I think that's an amazing opportunity to reframe what the compliance folks can really help us in the campus-wide prevention activities. All right. All right, a deeper dive again into, and this is just another version of what I just shared, and more in the document. This is a nice little checkbox, simple listing here of bystander intervention, peer ed programs, leadership programs. By the way, leadership programs are highly effective at, we have it in our study, around students shifting their attitudes away from pro-hazing to and looking at pro-social. And so they're, again, more costly, they're smaller, but they're really effective at shifting students' minds around that, shifting attitudes, I should say, and motivations and attitudes that hopefully result in those behavioral changes. Again, advisor and coach training, eliminating those gray areas and policies, and then larger coalitions that we've talked about. Social norming campaigns do work. Patrick and I have met with enough prevention scientists. They just have to be enacted with precision, but they're highly effective with precision. Michigan State social norming program, great opportunities to lean into that work. And if your campus isn't doing that, I would say that's one of the key opportunities. And again, what can be done at the community level, potentially what is the sub-community level for social norming campaigns within individual types of subpopulations. And when I say subpopulations, your interfraternity council chapters versus your multicultural chapters versus your performing arts groups versus your musical performing arts and/or your musical groups, your bands and things like that, that are more susceptible to the petri dish of hazing because of that identity salience and those activities. Patrick, walk us through what a coordinated hazing prevention system looks like.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I think one of the bigger challenges we have in prevention work is that we often jump straight to implementation. We want to launch we're looking for the silver bullet. We want to launch the program, create the training, roll out the new initiative that's going to fix it all. The roadmap approach is a reminder that effective prevention is more of cyclical than linear. It starts with understanding what's happening, then planning, implementing, evaluating, and engaging stakeholders throughout the process. And then you do it again. What I like about this section is it really frames prevention as continuous improvement. We talk about assessment versus evaluation, right? It's the evaluation wheel. It moves it back around rather than as a one-time effort. So it's not a completion goal in terms of, all right, I can check off assessment, I can check off planning, and then we're done. It really is to build this system that we continue to work through on a cycle. So a ready prevention system has a couple of different pieces that are important. A shared philosophy, policies that are aligned across both to the extent possible. I mean, again, like some organizations may have slightly different policies on hazing and the way they define it. What we often find is that, you know, a one organization may specifically define things as hazing, another may define it a little more loosely as activities. But just ensuring that the campus itself has its own aligned policy in the way they handle and educate and listen to and welcome hazing reporting and amnesty behavior, that sort of thing. So leadership support, data to inform decisions. One of the most important idea from that previous slide is really just readiness. Readiness is talk about readiness is more important than enthusiasm. We want you to be enthusiastic, but really want you to spend the time on the readiness aspect of it. So moving into this last couple pieces, what does a ready prevention system look like? What's your role in that? The first one is really someone has to take the lead. It needs someone to bring people together, to identify the gaps, coordinate efforts. What we often find is that there are a lot of folks who are very interested in hazing prevention, and you don't have to be the hazing expert to be to take the lead. You just need to be good at or at least committed to um, coordinating the effort itself. In fact, one of the themes throughout this document really is shared responsibility, but someone still has to organize the system itself. A good place to start on campus is just to bring together a small group of stakeholders and taking an honest look at where the efforts are aligned, what's fragmented, and what exists. I mentioned my activity of, you can see a whiteboard behind me, but I mentioned my activity of mapping things out because I'm a little bit visual, but sort of something to that effect that really helps you be able to see what is already happening and understand how the efforts can come together. If there's one takeaway from this area, it's that prevention becomes much easier when the right people are working from shared understanding and a shared plan rather than trying to coordinate on their own and understanding who's doing, not with a lack of understanding of who's doing what and to what extent.
Mhm.
So what does it look like? Well, one of the things that comes through pretty clearly in the research is that prevention strategies tend to work best when they reinforce each other. So we saw on our bingo card earlier, that's probably what we're going to end up calling it, Steve. I mean, there's no way around us not calling that a bingo card.
I've used it too many times as
I know,
the
I know.
hazing
Like,
prevention bingo card.
at what point do people yell out bingo when they say it?
Yeah.
I, we sometimes look for a program that's going to solve the problem, but that's really not how, as you all know, that's not how prevention works. The greatest impact comes when those pieces are working together and then sending consistent messages. And that's sort of the value of being able to reinforce some different things, leadership expectations, what the campus norms are. And we talk about this as complementary strategies operating across all the different levels that we talked about before. And our goal is really to create healthier pathways for belonging, connection, identity, and achievement that don't depend on harm. And so supporting those complementary structures and really engaging students and communities in prevention efforts, we found is a very effective way to do that as well.
Mhm. Patrick, just for our folks on the call, we're working with JED Foundation right now on crunching some data from ACHA and some other sources and building out a model for what you just said in terms of how students are onboarded into organizations and when they have the stress of hazing and how that and then what it does to loneliness and does it limit their ability to gain those positive protective factors of positive mental health that belonging should be able to garner for students. That when brought through a hazed experience, how that stress attributes to the students that feel the loneliness and they don't get those benefits basically, or they get a lesser form of those benefits and or an unlasting form of those benefits. And so excited at work that will be forthcoming with Jed and the Piazza Center about that model. Some key takeaways from our conversation again as we wrap up. Please have your questions. Unfortunately, I can't see the Q&A right now, so if there are questions in there, and Anthony, definitely let us know, and or get ready for some engagement here. Simultaneously, public health challenge, we've hit that hard. Really important to view it that way. And I think depending on people's lived experiences, potentially, there's a lot of subjectivity in this space. We're trying to limit and really grow a more common understanding of hazing versus, well, I went through that, and that's what hazing is, versus, oh, I went through that, and that's what it is, and how drastically different that is. And so really paying attention to what the student experience is versus our own informed and confirmation bias thoughts. All right. The opportunity that this is with grace, a lot of people winning here, and prevention, all boats rising to a positive prevention tide. Data assessment that Patrick has definitely hammered home, and the ability to us to think audaciously about shifting campus culture. Wouldn't you like to come to work and say, I'm working on shifting campus culture today, and tomorrow, and next week, and next year, and start to have the data that says, hey, we're rowing in a positive direction. We're starting to see that. We're starting to see potentially an increase in reporting, but a decrease in the severity of what those reports have to offer. Can we start to track those BACs over time and see how they're potentially being reduced as a result of these behaviors? Can we watch the harassment go down? Can we watch the violence starting to go in positive directions, especially if our campuses are also, experiencing shifts in who our students are, and thinking about those important issues on top of that. Some quotes to leave us with for some inspiration. Best chance, again, is the sociological model, the individual all the way through, and those environmental things to get those positive effects. And some summary thinking here, that what an amazing time that we're living in. Prevention science is maturing. We've got some laws now. Love what the Higher Education Commission is doing. You just came out with an email today about moving again past compliance with our hazardous drinking federal law, and how to reframe that biannual approach. And so excited that this is connected to that kind of conversation. That yes, they force compliance, but this is I think a new opportunity that we can move past compliance into building out some true prevention, the likes we have not seen, and really gaining that traction and gaining some more support for this hugely important work. And with that, I'm handing it back over to Patrick for the three-part charge in the charge for change. So Patrick.
Thanks. We wanted to end with the document and most of our conversations with, okay, what can you do? What's your next steps if you're implementing this on campus or in your situation? And the first one is really establishing those shared philosophies, definitions, and expectations. That involves broad stakeholders. Depending on your campus and situation, it could also involve legal counsel, students. The more folks you can, I think initially is helpful. Again, you want this to become a shared goal, shared understanding of what hazing is and what our expectations of campus organizations are. Investing in those coordinated prevention strategies, really can't say that enough. And it's not just the ad hoc meeting of hazing prevention. It really has one of the things we provide in the document numerous times is the a roadmap for how to really structure those conversations and how to think about what are the pieces that we should be asking, what are the questions we should be asking. And we're always helpful to, I certainly am happy to also answer those questions about what that looks like. And some of our campus partners have been great about letting us plug them into other folks who are like, how do we start? What did you do? At Tennessee, how did that happen? We have some great folks here and then across the What Works project that I think will be helpful in there. And then lastly is just building these systems for data collection, evaluation, and accountability. Folks really do want to see, stakeholders want to see change, understandably, but we also want to be able to demonstrate it. And we also want to showcase the good work that we've done and being able to see that change to make when you're in the work, being able to see that your efforts are making a difference, but also to be able to demonstrate that to folks. And one thing I found, I have an 18-year-old as of yesterday, who is interested in joining the fraternity. Him and his friends are. And one thing I found with them, anytime I've talked to them about prevention efforts or anything else, this is, I don't know if it's unique to this generation, and some of the rest of y'all are seeing this as well, is he'll say, well, can you point me to a resource? I'd like to read more about it. Can you tell me about it? Can you show me the research? Which is really, I mean, me, 18-year-old Patrick would never have asked that question, but I think this generation is thirsty for understanding what beyond social media is telling them is really going on in an organization. How do you, how do you recognize things? How do you address it? So I think that building these systems, showcasing the data collection, being real public and transparent about it, I think is also important.
Mhm. As we wrap up, our last slide is just some resources. Anthony in the Higher Education Center will be sharing the slide deck and the recording to folks. I know that. So thank you, Anthony, for that. In the chat or the quick Q&A, and please, if you have some other questions, but the first was what kind of buy-in or lack of buy-in from headquarters, from the fraternity and sorority life sector. I'm excited. I've got a couple of opportunities that are coming up later this summer. One is with the Fraternity Executives Association. We're doing a webinar where executives are unpacking their takeaways of the charge for change. So I haven't got a date for that yet, but I'm planning to, we'll get that out on our website and on our webpage. We're also working with Holmes Murphy Fraternity Practice, an insurance company that specializes in fraternities and sororities, for another webinar opportunity and takeaways thereof. I've talked to some of the executives that I've shared, and they've contributed to the document. So that actually in the contribution section, and Patrick mentioned there's a lot of people that had eyes on this document and helped edit the document. I think we're up to about 40 people. When you go to the section and you can look, you can see the executives that were involved in it and the headquarters that were involved in it. There's two or three. Back to the salient part of your question. How have some issues with national chapters recognizing the problematic behavior of chapters at our school, and how, again, the engagement with them? I think this is an interesting question, because I would say a lot of our campus thought process over the last couple of decades. So this is I'm going to take this question and kind of adapt it, if you don't mind. Is that we frame this as a fraternity problem. We frame this as a sorority problem. There's so many people I talk to immediately, well, like, let's put this over in fraternity sorority life. That could be where you have a hotspot, 1,000%. But these behaviors are most likely campus-wide within your culture of your organizations, and they are appearing in multiple spaces. And again, hazing looks differently, but the hazing phenomena is there. It's coming from us from middle schools and high schools, folks. So where those people are all joining, again, birds of a feather flocking together, yes. But they're flocking together in some other spaces, I'm guessing, around your campus community, especially if your fraternity sorority students are involved in other organizations, and back and forth, the fluidity of student involvement, and my lived experience of being 25 years of working directly with students on campus and student organizations and government and leadership and fraternity sorority advising. So I say all that to say, yes, buy-in from some of the organizations in terms of how they're helping and supporting. Headquarters are not created equal in some instances. And so whether and how they look and how they support alumni, same deal. It's such I'd love to have a sidebar conversation, because I have a lot of those relationships and know that there's some headquarters doing amazing prevention work. But the local organization or the local alumni might be off, not on the same page, right? And so it's interesting where the trio of relationships, and I'm bringing alumni or a chapter advising into that also, is part of that conversation in terms of, can we get folks on the same page? University of Missouri has done an amazing job of getting their alums, the campus and their prevention work coordinated as a really good example of to have each other's backs in the conversation. It's really a cool story. All right, the next question about good replacement activities that students can use for initiation. A lot of our education has been don't do this without alternative traditions that would be integrated. Meaningful activities. The anthropologist Eldit Chimino out of Kent State uses a very academic word here, fungibility. But Patrick, right? But I would say it's the students need to find value in it. And so I'm not going to give you a clear answer, but one answer I'm going to give you is if we involve students in the conversation about what their goals are and what's meaningful for them, then we have an opportunity to listen and to start to build things with students that are meaningful, that then clear through that these aren't not hazing activities, and that there are challenging activities, or meaningful activities, or growth opportunities for students. And we have cleared them that they don't, our policy or the way we interpret our policy, the way we interpret the federal legislation reporting definition of hazing, or if you want to use our center's version of that our scholars worked on, a more comprehensive view of hazing prevention, a resource on our website for a broader definition. You can really start to talk to students about the power and the mission drift of organizations and how those two things connect to then
Yeah,
form proactive activities. Patrick, please.
I have a very similar answer, I get asked this question a lot. I think part of it is really, for me, the first thing is to think about it this way. Hazing, one of the things we often find in the hazing literature is that hazing activities or hazing-like activities persist because they are meeting a legitimate need. Students are seeking belonging, identity, connection, a shared experience, which is one I often talk, with my son and daughters about is share, I know that you're looking for a shared experience. What are some healthy ways to achieve that, right? So the key question to Steve's point really is, for me, it's not what are we removing or replacing? But the first question for me is what purpose is that thing serving? And how can we still meet that need without causing harm in some way, right? And that tends to resonate with students because they think about, well, this is not really harmful. Yeah, well, is it? Where does it lead? And so engaging them in that conversation is super helpful. I would say to give you a bit more of a specific one following up on Steve's response too is some of the best memories that I have are a shared service experience I've had together, an outdoor adventure, a philanthropy event, some kind of intensive team project or competition, right? Things that where the outcome is really group cohesion, but the pathway is just different. So it's this shared experience that we've had together, and all of you think about too, some of the best experiences that you've had maybe in your life have been shared. Memorable ones have been shared experiences with others in some way, and that's kind of the direction I tend to go. And folks are like, "Well, what can we replace this with?" Well, what is it doing, and how can we do that without? How can we accomplish that same thing without causing harm?
Yeah, yeah. Carl has one question, I think, and then we'll be at time. And what is the most effective ways campuses are measuring whether their hazing prevention strategies are actually changing student behavior and not just awareness? Dr. Biddix, what's your thoughts?
We have a couple different ways that we do that, and this field really is evolving because in the hazing prevention space, we've spent so much time on hazing knowledge or satisfaction with programming because those outcomes are so easy to really assess. So the strongest approaches tend to use multiple sources of data. So we might look at prevalence data, reporting trends, bystander behaviors, organizational climate, perception of belonging, and how that might change. We also have developed it's under review right now, but I've developed a very short instrument that gets at uh, confidence in your ability to intervene as a way to measure change. There's a knowledge component because I do think that's still important is just understanding not just what hazing is, but what the consequences. Do you clearly understand what those consequences are in hazing? And then as far as behavioral change goes, that's one of the ways we see one of the several ways that we see some change when we work with our campuses. I will say it's tricky because um, you can say, well, our hazing reporting went up. Well, that actually may be a good thing because we've coached campuses in how to coach students in how to report things. On the flip side, you can say, well, our hazing incidents went up, and you say, well, that's actually a bad thing because our hazing's gone up. So some of that's in framing. We really do believe that educational component around measurement is super helpful as well.
Mhm. Well, as the time wraps up, I'll turn it back over. Thank you so much to the Higher Education Center for hosting us and this work. Again, it's a working document, so feedback, love your thoughts, and an opportunity to stay engaged in this, I think, important conversation. We're the next part of the project. We're building out. I think I may mention it. We're building out president and trustee resource, so that's going to be a new resource on our webpage coming up in the next, hopefully, month. We'll have a nice opportunity for how senior leadership can get engaged, those folks above them, in the conversation that can start to hopefully unlock some important resources for the prevention work that you all are doing on your campuses. So that's, and again, other multiple resources. And please, your feedback on what other opportunities or things you want, or things again, critiques, we're open to that, as well as some other thoughtful things that will help build out prevention practice. So with that, Anthony.
Well, thank you. A big thank you to both of our presenters for sharing of themselves and allowing us to uplift their work. I do just have a couple of housekeeping slides that I'd like to share with everybody. Here on the screen are just some upcoming events. Our next water cooler chat will be focusing around environmental scanning for impaired road use. That will be next week on June 9th. We have a recovery ally training. Our recovery is spoken here, train the trainer, on June 17th. Our next free webinar will be taking place July 9th, and we'll be focusing on new products, same nicotine, understanding e-cigarettes and oral nicotine pouch use among college students. We'll then be continuing today's conversation with our July water cooler chat. So we'll have a water cooler chat so we can have a little bit more of an informal meeting setting to discuss and address any of the questions that might have arisen today or that you have in the meantime. So again, our Charge for Change water cooler chat is scheduled for July 14th. And then we have a grant writing crash course scheduled for July 16th. And of course, we did just release the Biennial Review Learning Collaborative registration today, and the full schedule is live on our website. Just a reminder that today's session has been recorded, so you can expect to see it uploaded to our website within 3 business days. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care, all.